I was walking our dog Charlie when I saw the graveyard for the first time. A little white fence, not even knee-high, ran in a circle around maybe a dozen small headstones. There was space for a small gate along the fence, but it was empty now, like a missing tooth. Whether the gate was removed or never existed, I couldn't tell, but the rest of the fence was in good shape. It even looked freshly painted. "What do you think, Charlie?" I asked, pulling up my hood. The sky had been threatening rain all week, and it was finally making good. The Weimaraner tilted his head at me and then looked off toward nothing. The fact that nothing happened to be in the same direction of the graveyard, well, I figured it was a coincidence. But dogs always know, don't they? When something is bad and dangerous, and hungry, and close. Charlie knew. Even warned me in his own way. A shame I didn't notice until most everybody was, well, after it was too late to do anything about it. Nicole was hanging up pictures when we got back from our walk. I started unpacking one of the billion boxes scattered around the living room. It appeared to contain roughly 4,000 dish towels and a single chipped coffee mug. Charlie watched us, patiently, filled with the usual unshakable belief that if he sat long enough and looked adorable enough, sooner or later one of his owners would produce a treat. He was correct, and it was my wife who folded first, tossing him a dried sweet potato thing, which Charlie gratefully caught midair. "Like the neighborhood?" Nicole asked. "It's kind of perfect. Lots of folks out and about. Saw a few other families moving in. Oh, and there's even a graveyard in the middle of the development. You know, like how we always dreamed." Nicole made an ick sound, but overall seemed happy. I heard Brian and Anna thumping around upstairs, most likely still arguing about who got the room with the attached bath. If they hadn't sorted it out by dinner, I resolved to think up a weird game they could play where the winner got first bedroom dibs. It was still early in the afternoon, so I caught Nicole up on what I'd seen in our new neighborhood while we unpacked. We were far from the only new occupants of Stonebrook. At least 4 other houses had sold signs driven into their front yards like stakes through freshly vanquished vampires. The development was less than a year old, and I doubted it would take more than another 6 months before being filled to the brim. That was fine with me. It meant our property value would keep going up, 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 and away. "You think we'll make any friends with our neighbors?" Nicole asked, opening a new box to unpack. "Yeah, we'll be having joint ski vacations and holiday parties in no time," I guessed. "I'll try to chat some up next time Charlie and I make our rounds. I'll even knock on some graves if you like." Nicole scowled and shook her head. 1,000 teasing jokes about the living dead limping up to our house ran through my mind, but each evaporated before escaping my mouth. 8 years of marriage had left me with a finely honed sense of when to be a clown and when not to push it. And the truth was, I felt a small twinge of discomfort myself whenever I thought about the little cemetery. It was a family plot. Old. Would the bodies even be embalmed? Or would you find something rotted down to tar and marrow if you dug up one of the plots? I shivered. Nicole smiled. "Looks like maybe somebody just walked over your grave." "Not possible. I'm not leaving a body behind when I go, remember? Viking funeral? Have my brother launch fire arrows at a gasoline-soaked canoe with me in it, and then scatter the ashes somewhere meaningful," I added. "Like the Grand Canyon, or the ocean, or the last blockbuster on Earth." Nicole called for Anna and Brian, and we sat down to a family dinner of move-in day sandwiches and popcorn, and whatever other road trip snacks we still had from the drive. It was a good night. Brian was distracted by his phone, a new friend or a girl maybe. Anna was joking with Nicole about something. Something to do with school. I can't remember what exactly. I really wish I could. That was the last time we all sat down together as a family for dinner. I woke up in the middle of our first night in the new house. Some outside sound had entered my dreams. What was it? A whispering or a knocking or rasping? No, not rasping. Rustling. Like the sound of many things moving at once, but moving quietly, carefully, deliberately. I sat up in bed, blinking against the total darkness of the room. There it was again. The rustling. Faint and far away, I guess, but it was so eerie that I could hear it at all. "Hey, Nicole," I whispered. "Hey, are you awake?" Nothing in response other than that rustle again in the dark. It sounded like it was coming from somewhere below me. I got up and stumbled through the room without turning on a light. I don't know why I didn't wake Nicole up to listen. I wish I had. I guess I didn't want her to think I was crazy if I was the only one who heard the sound. The rustling was actually fainter when I finally made it downstairs. There was only a little light in the house spilling in from outside through half-curtained windows. I paused on the second-to-last step and listened. The noise was moving away, growing softer and less frequent. By the time I stepped on the living room rug, the night was silent. I waited. Listened for almost a full minute, then started padding back up the stairs. There was something unsettling about the rustling that made me glad it had stopped. I'd watched a Civil War documentary a few years back, and they demonstrated how a battlefield surgeon would operate by sawing through half a pig carcass and then sewing up the wound. They'd pushed in real close during the last part of the demo, so you got a great look and even a great listen. The rustling I'd heard outside the house that night reminded me of the sounds of the needle and thread slithering through the pig's flesh as the surgeon closed the cut. Wind, I thought. Dream. HVAC system. The first signs of a brain tumor. But probably just the wind traveling through the branches of the maple trees that line our street. There's a landing at the top of the stairs with a big window that looks out over the front yard. A silver-gray column of moonlight fell in through the glass, giving enough light to make out a shadow standing on my lawn, but not enough to see it clearly. It was a man, tall but a little bent. I remember thinking maybe he was hurt, so I moved closer to the window for a cleaner look. The guy was right at the edge of my yard, nearly in the road. He was facing my house, but I couldn't pick out any details about him. Too many clouds and moon shadows for a good look at his face. We both stared at the other for a minute, and then the stranger turned and began to walk away. Or, walking isn't entirely the right word. He moved like a man who had just learned to walk. And he almost had it figured out. His knees threatened to collide more than once, and he was moving with a limp, favoring his right side. I watched him fall over twice, each time dragging his body along the road for a dozen yards or so, before shakily standing up and continuing on like a shell-shocked soldier wandering out of a trench. Each time the man got near a streetlight, he would veer away from the glow, stumbling back into darkness, and always moving toward the tree line that marked the edge of the woods around our neighborhood. I stood, frozen in the moonlight, as the night visitor slipped into the forest, movements jerking like a puppet with stiff strings. Then the figure was gone, and I was left blinking, wondering if I was dreaming, or maybe this was what sleepwalking felt like. It didn't seem real. Any of it. Not the rustling, not the man in the yard. Once I was back in our bedroom, I considered waking up Nicole. But what was I going to tell her? "Hey dear, sorry to startle you. I think there was a zombie outside the house. Or maybe just a creepy neighbor. Or maybe your husband is just going slowly, gently, completely crazy." Before getting back into bed, I went and lifted the corner of the curtain on the window, peeking out at the last spot in the tree line where I'd seen the weird guy slip away. I'm not sure what I was expecting. Some trail of destruction, maybe, like Godzilla's wake on his way to Tokyo. But there was nothing. No sign, no proof there was ever anything at all. Just the sleeping neighborhood tucked away in the middle of silent woods. The trees were slick with the day's rain, but that would all freeze overnight if it hadn't already. Streetlights stood out like nails driven into the night. These little bright scars in the dark. I followed the line of them from where it ended at the back road to where it started at the center of the house development. The graveyard sat high on a hill there, at the heart of the neighborhood where the lights started. Or ended, I guess. I tried to put the bizarre experience out of my mind, and laid back in bed next to Nicole. Charlie and I were on another walk first thing the next morning, when we saw another moving truck. This time, however, it looked like the family was on their way out. We stood under a tree watching the movers buzzing back and forth. Big, quiet men with thick black belts around their stomachs. The departing family was helping. A man and woman with 3 little boys. There was something about the way the parents were behaving that made me stop and observe everybody for a little longer than I usually would. Especially with Charlie trying to pull on his leash to go after a Canadian goose. The adults were zipping boxes from the house to the moving van at warp speed. Almost like they had a deadline. At the same time, both the man and the woman looked so exhausted I was surprised they were standing. Much less zipping around like hummingbirds that learned how to drink coffee. They eventually noticed me and Charlie standing across the street, so I waved and walked over. "Howdy, neighbors," I said, unleashing the most cheerful grin I could drag out. The couple stopped moving boxes. They stood together between me and their kids, and I got the unexpected but absolutely unshakable idea that they were scared of me. Or at least, awfully interested in me keeping my distance from their children. I tried to smile even more disarmingly, but it probably went in the other direction. "We just moved in," I said, pointing down the street. "How are y'all liking Stonebrook?" The pair shared a look. They were both around my age, maybe mid-30s, and made an interesting pair. The woman was very tall, her face soaking in shadows cast by her gardening hat. The man was short and balding, but muscled like a powerlifter. He took a step toward me, and I instinctively tensed up. "You should leave," the man said, barely above a whisper. Okay, I said, backing up. I didn't mean to...
"No, I don't mean here,"
he said.
"I mean this neighborhood. It's not a good place."
His, I assumed, wife was looking around the nearby houses while we talked. Something must have spooked her, because she took 2 steps forward and leaned in. "Walter, we don't know him," she whispered. "He might be..."
"Okay, June," Walter said. "Okay, you're right. Buddy, I'm sorry, we don't have anything to talk about. We're out of here, hopefully before dinner."
The couple turned away and walked back to their kids. Walter hesitated in his driveway, giving me one last glance.
"Listen, I'm sorry, you seem normal enough,"
he said, ignoring the glare from his wife.
"But you really should get out of Stonebrook as soon as you can. We've only been here a week, but there's already so much... shit. If you're normal, you wouldn't believe me. And if you're not... well, we'll be gone by tonight either way."
Walter's wife returned to his side, one delicate hand on his bowling ball of a shoulder, trying to steer him away. She must have noticed my absolute confusion. The little bit of her face I could see from under the hat softened. "If anyone knocks on your door after dark, you shouldn't answer. Don't go out after sundown either. And if anyone you know starts acting..." She looked back at her kids. 2 of the 3 were moving boxes from the house to the truck in a mini conga line, but the third, a little boy, was standing on the porch staring at us. "If anyone you know starts acting strange, just don't be alone with them or let anyone else be alone with them. Do you understand?" "Not at all," I admitted, but the pair were already gone, joining their kids next to the U-Haul. The one boy was still separate from the others, still watching me and Charlie while we stood on the sidewalk at the edge of their yard. Feeling uncomfortable and confused, I gave the kid a friendly wave. He just stared until we left. I tried to shake off the creepy encounter. 10 minutes of walking in the sunshine had me feeling fine in no time. Charlie and I took a loop around the rest of Stonebrook, then started heading home. I wasn't planning on walking by the cemetery, but that's the way our route ended up winding. It was even smaller up close. Not the dozen or so graveyards I'd guessed the day before, but maybe only 7 or 8. The stones themselves were small and weathered. They were carved to something that was once white but had been sun-stained to a dirty gray. I couldn't make out any names or dates from where I was standing just outside the short fence. It didn't feel right stepping into the cemetery to get a better look. I told myself it was respect holding me back from getting any closer. Well, that and the fact that Charlie was not a fan of the area at all. He began whining as we approached the hill. By the time we were at the fence, Charlie was tugging at his leash, trying to drag me back toward our house down the street. And weighing in at nearly 90 pounds of muscle and anxiety, he nearly succeeded. "Easy, Charlie, easy," I said. "We're not going near the dead people." He tilted his head at me. "Okay, we're not going any nearer than we already have. Just want to look for a second, alright?" It wasn't alright. Not by Charlie's measure. After about 2 minutes of trying to stand without getting wrapped up like an AT-AT walker by my dog's leash, I surrendered. I took one last look at the graveyard before I allowed Charlie to lead us away. There were a few trees scattered among the stones. They were bare of leaves, which was normal for the time of year, but they were also stunted and sickly. The trunk of the tree closest to the cemetery's northern fence appeared to be dry rotted, its bark flaky and brown-orange in spots. The last thought I spared the cemetery before leaving was that I didn't like the faint smell I detected. Nothing crazy. It didn't smell like death or anything dramatic. It was an earthy scent. Like a field after a rainstorm, but with a hint of something spoiled under all of it. I let Charlie lead us home, walking quickly but not rushing. Nicole was up unpacking again when we walked in. The kids were still asleep. My wife had on gray sweatpants, and my faded Red Hot Chili Peppers t-shirt. Her hair was tied up in a scarf. I remember thinking how pretty she looked. Brown eyes jumping from box to box looking for her next target, and smiling as she worked. We spent the rest of the day just settling in, checking out the house, unpacking, and playing games with the kids. Then we DoorDashed Chinese for an early dinner. I remember it being early enough that the sun was still out when it was delivered, and just setting when Nicole took Charlie out for his evening walk. Charlie returned alone half an hour later, dragging his leash and looking stressed beyond anything I'd ever seen from him. Hey, buddy," I said, opening the door he was scratching at. "Where's your mom, Charlie?" I stepped out onto the front porch, expecting to see Nicole running down the street after Charlie gave her the slip. But it was starting to rain, and no one was moving anywhere I could see. "Nicole?" I said loudly. "Hey, Nicole." She didn't call back or come jogging down the road. My throat was feeling weird, so I swallowed, then yelled her name. Much louder this time. I tried to keep any tinge of panic out of my voice. "Nicole?" Charlie was still on the floor, still on his leash looking up at me. He was whining so quietly I didn't notice at first. I pulled my phone from my pocket and called Nicole. It rang for what felt like a few years before going to her voicemail. I tried again with the same result, then yelled out again, and then another call. I felt it crawling up and over me. That panic. The anxious madness that you feel when a normal day teeters on the beam before falling into an awful damn day. That happened to me once before when I was in college, and my uncle died suddenly in a car crash. I remember the phone call, the confusion, the resistance to the growing, unavoidable certainty that your life had just changed in a terrible way. My pulse was up and my stomach was cramped. I took a deep breath and called my wife for the 4th time in about 2 minutes. Maybe her phone was on silent. Maybe she was still out searching for Charlie. In the rain? I asked myself. Sure, she loves Charlie. She would look for him in the rain or a blizzard or a volcanic eruption. Okay, I said out loud. But after she couldn't find Charlie, she would call me so we could all look. She would call. What if she was hurt? The thought went off like a Molotov in my mind, spreading until it was the only idea I could focus on. I pictured Nicole laying in some ditch or hollow with a broken leg, black sky pouring down on her. She'd call if she could, if that was the scenario, but if she couldn't reach her phone for some reason, then she'd be counting on me going to find her. I took Charlie off his leash and hustled upstairs. Brian was in his room unpacking, and Anna was sitting in a window nook reading. She looked up at me when I left the stairs and asked where Mum was, since she'd heard me calling outside for her. I told both of the kids that their mom was probably meeting some new neighbors, and I was just going to go pop out for a second to see if she needed anything. Anna was 10 and accepted my excuse with a smile before going back to her book. Brian, however, was 13, and had a much better ear for lies. He gave me an odd glance, but I smiled and promised I'd be back in 2 shakes. 2 shakes turned into nearly 30 minutes of me scouring Stonebrook. It wasn't a big development, maybe 50 or 60 houses spreading out in rings with the old cemetery in the middle. That was where the original farmhouse was when all the land was owned by one family. I remember the real estate agent telling us that when we toured the house. It's strange the places your mind will go for a distracting memory, when your agitation is slouching slowly towards hysteria. I peppered my foot search for Nicole with frequent phone calls, which only resulted in stacking voicemails over voicemails. I scoured all 3 main streets, hood trickling with rainwater, my flashlight sweeping between houses and under trees. After an hour, I checked the entire neighborhood twice over. All except for the little graveyard. I wasn't even trying to consciously avoid it, but I realized I had. I got the sense that the cemetery was once well cared for, and only recently had been more or less forgotten. There were a few weeds among the tombstones, and a glass vase filled with nearly mummified flowers in front of one grave in particular. But there wasn't any sign of Nicole. The ground was soft from the rain, but it was too dark to see much of anything. I did note that the entire hill was messy. More dirt than grass, and quickly turning into pure mud. Hope none of the coffins float out, I muttered, drawing my flashlight across the eroded markers. There were lots of shadows and sunken places on the ground, but nothing deep enough to hide a person. I walked home quickly, trying to stay a few steps ahead of the cold fear that kept flashing every imaginable horror that might have happened to my wife through my mind. If I knew then what I know now about what actually happened to Nicole, the worst, darkest, most vile things I came up with, they weren't even close. I made my way home after the graveyard to tell my kids their mum was missing. Just the thought of starting the conversation was filling me with dread and a terrible guilt. They were children. How were they going to process this new, ugly thing? I'd do my best to summarize the situation for them, and then I would call the police. That was the plan. Needing to wait 24 hours to file a missing persons report is a myth. I knew that. But the sheer, surreal misery of the night was blanking my mind on what I would tell everyone. Nicole went out to walk the dog right around sunset, so about 5 p.m. or 5:30. Charlie came back holding his leash at 6:41 p.m. I remember the exact time because I checked my phone to see if there were any missed calls from Nicole as soon as Charlie appeared. While I was walking up our driveway, I kept mentally rehearsing how I was going to break the news to the kids. Was there any good way to tell children their mom was missing? Should I inject optimism? Sugarcoat? Make promises? Or just be frank and completely honest and tell them I didn't know if... Not a thought I wanted to finish, even in my own mind, and I opened our front door, still undecided how I was going to handle the next part. Then I saw Nicole sitting at the kitchen table, playing cards with the kids, and I froze. I stood in the doorway staring until Anna noticed me and told me, "Look, Mom's home." I managed a limp smile and a nod. My wife was facing away from me, and when she turned in her chair, for an instant I thought I was looking at a stranger. Then she smiled. really smiled, and it was just Nicole there. The same girl I'd met at a friend's Halloween party 15 years ago, but now even more lovely. I grinned, still confused, but nearly shaking with relief. "Where were you?" I asked, attempting to sound calmer than I felt. "When Charlie came back, I went looking for you. I was worried that... well, I was worried." Nicole took a second to reply. Several seconds, actually. An odd look passed over her face. Eyes closing, her jaw tight. Then she snapped out of it, whatever it was, and smiled wider. "The dog had slipped away to chase a squirrel," Nicole said. "I'm fine. We're fine. We're all fine. We just lost track of time. Sorry to worry you." "Okay, but you could have called," I pointed out. "And I called you." Another pause before she had an answer. "I lost my phone chasing the dog," Nicole finally replied. "And then we got all turned around and mixed up. New neighborhood, you know? Are you hungry?" In our years together, we'd both gotten good at knowing when the other one was lying. That night, I genuinely could not tell. What she was telling me was plausible, if not at all how I expected her to react to Charlie running. For that matter, it was already unusual that our dog would take off after a squirrel. And why would Nicole lie to me about all of it anyway? But I pressed all of those concerns down into my chest and locked them there. It was a good night, I told myself. An eventful night. A terrifying night for a bit there, but now everything was okay. We had all sat and played cards, then ate dinner, and then unpacked the last of our boxes before bed. Nicole kept watching me all throughout the night. I acted like I didn't notice. She was acting normal enough, other than those brief pauses now and again, like she was stopping to think about what she was saying carefully. Her nose also began bleeding, which she stuffed with tissue, blaming the bleed on allergies. My biggest fear that night was that she'd had a medical event or something and needed to go to a hospital. A fall turned into a concussion, maybe. Or, God, a stroke? Ultimately, Nicole wasn't showing any signs of an emergency, so I tried to relax. Still, I found myself watching Nicole for the rest of the night. She caught me looking when she was brushing her teeth. All she did was stop and smile at me. We laid down in bed and I immediately clicked off the light, telling Nicole that I was worn out. After a minute of silence in the dark, I felt my wife's fingers on my shoulder. She pressed a fingertip to my neck and lightly brushed the space between my jawline and collarbone. It made me shiver. Not in a pleasant way. "Hey, that tickles," I said, turning away. Nothing for a moment, and then her fingers were pushing against the back of my neck. Not hard enough to be painful, but not exactly comfortable either. What are you doing?" In response, Nicole kissed my shoulder. Or it was half a kiss and half almost a bite. She didn't break the skin, but it was awfully close. I slipped away, putting space between us by rolling off the bed. "What the hell?" I snapped. Nicole didn't say anything back. There was no light in the room, not even moonlight. In the blackness, I heard my wife shifting in bed. "Nicole?" Still nothing from my wife, and now she wasn't moving at all. Seconds stretched out, and all I could think to do was stand dully, waiting for things to feel normal. "I just remembered I need to send some emails back to the office," I told the darkness. "I shouldn't be too long. I'll just be downstairs. Are you heading to sleep?" No answer. "Okay. Love you, Nicole. Good night." I heard her shifting again as I was leaving the bedroom. It was louder than before. A rustling that reminded me of something I couldn't place. Whatever it was, I wasn't a fan. I ended up sleeping on the couch. I had a dream that people were standing outside of our house trying to look in the windows. There was the rustling sound from earlier, like running water or wind through a forest. I woke up to find Nicole standing halfway down the stairs, silhouetted by the light from my open laptop. She froze when I looked at her, stared at me, then softly walked back up the stairs. There was no more sleep for me that night. I stayed on the couch watching TV with the lights on until dawn. It was cold that morning. A cold that chilled the windows and left all the lawns in Stonebrook gilded with frost. When I hadn't heard Nicole stirring by 9, I padded up the stairs and inched our bedroom door open. She was fast asleep, or I guess she was. My wife was somewhere hidden in the middle of a mountain of blankets. I moved to gently close the door, but Nicole must have heard me. She asked me to turn the heat up. "Are you sick?" I asked. "The heat's already at 70 or so." Nicole didn't respond with words. Instead, she started to hiss from under the covers. The sound started so low at first, I chalked it up to my imagination. But the hissing got louder and louder until I backed out of the bedroom, slamming the door. I fumbled with the thermostat cover, before finally getting it open and cranking the heat up to 80 degrees. The hissing gradually trailed off until the house was quiet again. I went to check on the kids next. Both were hanging out in their rooms. Anna was sitting at her window, sketching the view of our new neighborhood. She didn't notice me, so I stood watching her. It always struck me how much Anna looked like her mom, with her dark hair, bright eyes, and little Roman nose. Brian was the opposite, blonde like his dad, and ever in search of new things to put together or take apart. I found him sitting at his desk, working on assembling his computer from a box marked "Fragile Stuff." Careful, careful, careful. Brian was sitting at his desk setting up his computer. Charlie was waiting by the back door when I got downstairs, so I let him out into the yard and stood on the deck while he did his business. After filling his bowl with kibble, I started searching for anything I could cook the family for breakfast. We hadn't made a grocery run since moving in, and the food and snacks we brought with us from the trip were tapped out. I closed the last empty cabinet and sighed. Maybe it would be good for all of us to get out of the house for breakfast anyway. A sniffle caused me to freeze, mine snapping back to Nicole's weirdness the night before. But it was only Anna standing in the living room, watching me fail to forage. "Do you remember where we packed the Pop-Tarts?" she asked. "I don't think we brought any, honeybee," I said. "We might have to run to the store first. Do you want—" I stopped talking when I spotted Nicole watching us from the bottom of the stairs. Brian was right behind her. "You guys want Pop-Tarts?" Anna asked. "We don't have any, but I think we will soon." We gathered together to brainstorm a solution to our lack of groceries. I kept glancing at my wife as subtly as I could. Nothing she was saying was all that strange, but the way she was speaking was making me more and more anxious. Nicole peppered her words with brief pauses from time to time, and longer pauses when she was responding to questions. It was almost like she was double-checking her notes before opening her mouth. Could it be a head injury? I wondered. That might explain all of it. But other than the verbal delays, Nicole seemed perfectly healthy. Hell, she was practically humming with energy. It was her suggestion we finally followed to solve the breakfast crisis. She would take the kids on a walk around Stonebrook so they could explore the neighborhood. I wasn't in favor of the idea at first, but I had a hard time articulating why, to my family or to myself. In the end, with no good reason why Nicole and the kids shouldn't go on a walk together, I reluctantly agreed. There was one line I drew, however. I would take Charlie with me to the grocery store. Nicole's nose was bleeding again. Just a trickle of red under her nostril. "Don't you think the dog would rather be outside on a walk? You can't leave him in the truck, it's too cold. And it's not like you can take him into the store." "Sure I can. Hey, your nose again, are you okay?" "Are dogs allowed in stores now?" she asked, ignoring me, and quickly wiping above her lip. "I'll just tell him he's a service dog if push comes to shove. Won't be in there more than 15 minutes to grab some essentials anyways. Half an hour tops." Something was bothering Nicole. She almost seemed angry. I saw her open and close her mouth a few times, like she was attempting to form an argument, but the words refused to stumble into existence. Nicole rubbed her temples. Fine. I was having a hard time swallowing and couldn't find my keys for the longest time. Anna was the one who finally found them, where I'd tossed them behind the television. The three of them stood on the porch while Charlie and I drove away. I know what you're thinking. I know. If I wasn't comfortable leaving my dog with Nicole, how could I ever leave my kids? You have to understand, right then at that moment, I didn't realize how dangerous my wife was to all of us. As far as I could tell, she was just acting a little odd. I never thought she'd hurt them. Never. Never. Keeping Charlie with me was nothing but a reflex. More good luck charm than anything else. The kids are fine with their mom, I told myself. Everything is fine. I repeated that mantra over and over in my head the entire drive from Stonebrook into town. Charlie and I passed acre after acre of empty cornfields on the way into town. The sky was that sharp winter's blue that's so clear it seemed fragile. We got an odd look or two walking into the grocery store, but nobody said anything and we shopped fast. 10 minutes after entering the store, we were back loading food into the truck, then roaring home. I was driving so quickly trying to get back that I caught the attention of a state trooper. All told, the trip plus ticket ended up taking about 40 minutes. I pulled into the driveway like it was a NASCAR pit stop. I'm home and I have Pop-Tarts, I called out as soon as I opened the door. The house was empty. Okay, I said to Charlie. It's been less than an hour. They're probably still on their walk. Let's give them a few more minutes before worrying, okay? I waited for another 10 minutes, then I called Nicole again. And again. I called her every 5 minutes for the next half hour. Then every 3. Then I just kept calling every time it went to voicemail. I was getting near the point where I'd call the police when Nicole and the kids walked in the front door. All 3 were covered in dirt. What happened? I asked, running over to Anna. Her face was dark with soil. Black lines ran down from ears, mouth, eyes, and nose. Brian was the same. And neither of them were looking at me, just staring at nothing. Nicole was looking at me, though. Watching me closely. I wiped at Anna's face. What happened to you all? Is anybody hurt? Nicole shook her head and smiled wide, but nobody answered. The only sound was a low growl. I turned to see Charlie backed all the way up to the opposite wall from us. Teeth bared. A quiet snarl growing louder until it erupted in a series of vicious barks. I couldn't stop staring at our dog. Charlie was the sweetest, mildest, afraid of his own shadow big dog I'd ever met. I would have been less surprised to hear him sing opera than growl at the kids. It's okay, buddy, I said. Everything's okay. I held my hand out and Charlie approached slowly. When he got close, he began to whine. Just as he was starting to calm down, Nicole took a step toward him. More of a lunge, if I'm being honest. Charlie was out the still open door in an instant, running out into the neighborhood and disappearing behind our neighbor's house before I was on the porch. Charlie? I shouted into the bright, empty day. Come back. I got ready to run off after him, but hesitated on the second step. When I turned around, Nicole was watching me from the doorway, still smiling. The kids weren't in view behind her. What happened on your walk? I asked, forcing myself to sound calmer than I felt. Why are you all covered in dirt? She didn't answer me. After a few moments of silence, Nicole walked back into the house, walking up the stairs with the kids following in her wake, like a pair of remora gliding after a shark. I experienced an intrusive thought watching the 3 of them. This is not my family. My family is gone. I shook that existential crisis off and hesitated. Something was wrong with my wife and children, and as much as I loved Charlie, they needed to be my priority. Besides, Charlie was a relatively cautious dog and would most likely come back on his own soon enough. Knowing all of that, I still found myself walking out the door instead of up the stairs. I'll find him real quick and we will come back and sort everything out with Nicole and the kids. And it'll all be fine, I told myself as I looked around the sunny neighborhood for any sign of Charlie. The search was surreal, like I was dreaming. Some part of my mind, a big part, was screaming the entire time that I had to go back home immediately. Something was wrong with Nicole and the kids. They were in danger. They needed me. The thoughts banged around like bricks in a washing machine, but to my shame, I couldn't force my feet to turn around. The fear was too great. This hanging, heavy dread that yawned behind me all the way back to my house. I didn't stop looking for Charlie until I reached the graveyard. The field inside the fence was disturbed, with deep rows furrowed into the dirt in what looked like a completely random pattern. At least 2 of the graves lay partially open, though I didn't approach either edge to see how far down the holes went. Everything was rough. Not the kind of regular lines and trenches I'd expect to see from heavy equipment or even shovels. It appeared the pits were dug out by hand. A few minutes of staring at the torn ground snapped me out of whatever fugue state I'd been in all morning. Charlie would be okay on his own. I had to get to the kids. To Nicole. Maybe they were sick, a shared fever that was making them act strange and distant. Or there could be a gas leak at home. I remembered reading somewhere that CO2 poisoning could do terrible things to people, before becoming lethal. I got ready to run back home, then stopped so suddenly I almost tripped. My eye had caught one of the trenches in the cemetery. It was shallow, maybe a foot deep and 3 feet long, carving out a slight curve at the base of a crumbling tombstone. At first, I thought pieces from the marker had fallen into the rut. Little white debris stood out against the black dirt. But then I noticed the specks moving. Near hypnotized, I walked over and knelt on the ground next to the trench for a closer look. Worms. Dozens of pale, thick worms the length and width of my little finger squirmed around the hole. There was a smell to them from that close. Not awful exactly, but also not something I'd want to buy in candle form either. It reminded me of rain, and the scent released by trees when they first open in the spring. There was a sharper odor under that, musty and faint. We had a neighbor who was a hoarder when I was a kid. Dad and I helped clean out their house after they died. I found 2 dead cats under their sofa. So ancient they were practically mummified. The worm smell was like that house. Sickly sweet. The white worms were milling around while I leaned closer and closer, still trying to convince myself that the shapes were just buried roots. When I was only a yard or so above the trench, all of the creatures suddenly froze. A moment later, they all began stretching up in my direction like flowers turning to face the sun. Then they stretched further. A cluster of balloon strings, reaching out 3 inches above the dirt. Then 6. Then I was falling back onto my ass, crawling away from the pit. I jumped the low fence at a full sprint, stumbling when I landed but managing not to fall. The way the worms had stretched toward me, it was too deliberate for a bug. Too synchronized. Maybe they were all reacting to my shadow blocking the sun, I thought, rounding the corner beyond the graveyard hill. Maybe... About a quarter of my neighbors on the adjoining street were watching me run. Men, women, children. Even a few pets were on their lawns or looking from open doorways as I sprinted back to my house. I recognized Walter and June standing in their front yard. The U-Haul was back in their driveway. Even as surreal as my day was going, I still found it odd that they appeared to be moving in now instead of out. Their kids were marching boxes back into the house, but stopped to stare as I jogged by. I was struggling for breath by that point. 2 decades removed from my high school track days with not much running done in between. Everyone that I saw out watching me seemed to almost be attached on a hinge. Their eyes following me together, synchronized, craning their necks to track me. The way they all turned together made me think of the worms. I ran faster. It was still late morning when I limped through my front door, utterly spent and gasping for air. Despite the early hour, the house was dark. Every curtain was closed, and heavy towels were duct-taped over the blinds, completely strangling the light. "Cole?" I wheezed. I cleared my throat and took a deep breath. "Nicole, where are you?" "Here," she said from the kitchen. I tried flipping the switch next to the door, but the living room remained pitch black. Some faint whisper of caution prevented me from ripping the towels and curtains down from the windows, even though I desperately missed the light. I compromised by partially opening the front door, allowing a cloudy stream of sunshine to creep into the house. In that dimness, I saw why the switches weren't working. The bulbs had been removed from the lamp in the corner, and from the ceiling fan. The missing bulbs were sitting in a pile on the kitchen table, a small pyramid of glass and filament threatening to roll off at any moment. Nicole was up on a stepladder, fiddling with the lighting fixture over the oven. "Honey?" I asked. "Why are you changing all the light bulbs in the house?" "I'm not," she said, plucking the bulb from its socket. "I'm just taking them out." Nicole looked down at me from the stepladder. For a brief moment, I didn't recognize anything about her. "Could you close the door when you come in? You weren't raising a shed, were you?" "Do you mean a barn?" "Sure." I didn't move. "Nicole, what is happening?" My wife hopped off the ladder and added the bulb to the pile. "What do you mean? Be specific."
"And close that fucking door!"
The last part came out as a hiss. I struggled to swallow, and part of me, a large part, wanted to just walk out the door into the sunlight and keep walking. Then, I thought of Anna, and Brian, and their dull, drained faces, and I decided that whatever the fuck was going on was about to stop. "You're not my wife," I said. I wasn't planning on saying that to her, but I recognized the truth of it as soon as I blurted it out. Nicole nodded. "It feels better to say it out loud, doesn't it?" She thought you would have figured it out earlier, but it's okay. We know it's a lot. Her agreeing with me was the last thing I expected. Laughter, annoyance, confusion, even outright anger I could have dealt with. But her casual acceptance of an insane thought made my brain reset. While I stood open-mouthed and dumb, Nicole walked past me into the living room. I heard the door close gently, and then the light was gone completely. My wife's homemade blackout curtains left the kitchen one big shadow I was soaking in. "Sit down. I'll tell you everything. And then I'll ask you a question," Nicole instructed, walking back into the room. I fumbled around until I caught hold of the back of a chair and then dropped into it. My eyes were adjusting to the gloom. There was just enough light leaking in that I could make out the shapes and forms, if not details. So I heard, more than saw, Nicole sit across from me at the table. "This is scary," Nicole began. "But everything will be fine as long as you pay attention. Your wife is safe." In the dark kitchen, her voice sounded less like her voice than before. Thinner. "Where's my wife?" I said, barely able to get the words out. "Right here," Nicole said. "Your kids, too." A ringing started in my ears, and it was hard to breathe normally, like I had to fight for escaping oxygen. What is happening? What the hell is going on, Nicole? Why are you acting different? She asked. Insane? I countered. She wrinkled her nose like I just commented on new wrinkles on her face. Some cognitive inconsistency should be expected during the transfer, Nicole said. Your wife resisted. Aggressively. That resistance caused a lot of damage before it was put under control. Her mind isn't exactly what it used to be. My night vision was fully in, and just good enough that I could see my wife leaning over the table between us. It wasn't quite clear enough for me to be sure, but it did seem like she was smiling. You sound fucking crazy, I managed. I'm gonna call an ambulance. I tried standing up, only to feel an iron-strong hand push me back into the chair. Brian put a hand on my other shoulder as well, rooting me in place.
Relax, Dad,
he said, voice rough like he was recovering from a cold.
Just listen to what she has to say.
I struggled against my son for a moment, but he was immovable. Anna was with us in the kitchen, too. I could make out her silhouette watching from the corner. If this is like a family prank or something, it's great, I said, trying not to shake. It's hilarious. Let's go outside and laugh about it.
Too bright,
Nicole whispered.
We don't like it. I'm sensing the same resistance from you that your wife had. That's a caustic emotion, you know? Your stubbornness.
Nicole slid her chair away from the table and patted behind me deeper into the kitchen. I tried to turn with her, but Brian held me tight. She began humming softly, which was occasionally interrupted by the rasp of metal drawn across wood. When Nicole sat back down across from me, there was a long knife in her hand. I used to remember what specific task this one was for, she sighed, jamming the tip of the blade into the table. Another memory lost because she had to put up a fight. Anna, sweetie, turn on the kitchen light for your dad, but thumb the dimmer down, okay? What are you doing? I asked as the weak but sudden light left me blinking. Why do you... Oh God, stop! Nicole splayed her left hand out on the table at an angle. She pressed down on the knife, causing the edge to drop like a paper cutter. The knife took off almost all of her pinky, most of her ring and middle fingers, and the tip of her index. The room was silent until I'd sucked in enough air to start screaming. Nicole's expression was halfway between patient and bored. Look close, she said, pushing her maimed hand closer. Spurts of blood gushed from little white veins, already soaking into the tablecloth. I gathered a deep breath to scream again, then choked when I got a better look at the blood vessels, which were already slipping away into her hand. Worms. The worms inside of Nicole's ruined fingers were the same pale color as the ones from the graveyard. Only these were smaller and thinner than the Goliaths I'd seen squirming in the ground. What? I gasped. Anna brought her mom a dish towel from the sink, which Nicole wrapped around her new stumps. Don't worry, my wife promised. They'll grow back. That's one of the gifts we can give you. It is a shame about the few we lost, she added, nodding toward the pile of digits bleeding out on the table. But I do believe this has saved us a heck of a lot of time getting you caught up, right, dear? I couldn't answer. Couldn't break away from staring at Nicole's fingers. They were twitching as tiny white worms and pieces of worms fled the flesh. Blackness closed in quick, and the next thing I remember is waking up in the living room on the couch. Nicole, Anna, and Brian were all sitting around me. Nicole still pressing a red towel to her hand. Are you okay, Daddy? Anna asked. I sat up slowly. What the fuck are you, and what did you do to my family? Nicole smiled. It's us. We're different. Just different. And more. A lot more, actually. You saw the cemetery already, right? Down the road? Couldn't really miss it, I whispered. Everything started there, Nicole continued. Now, a long time ago, long for you, but even longer for us, We crawled there in the dark earth, thinking nothing. Blind, deaf, and dumb. But then, the voice. Oh, the lovely voice. My wife was smiling. Anna and Brian looked nearly rapturous. She came and spoke to us every single day after they buried her husband. Nicole continued. He was a farmer and she was his devoted wife. They used to live here when this was only one little farmhouse and acres of fields. She visited his grave each morning and evening for many, many years. The widow left her dead husband flowers and gifts, but best of all, she talked to him, which meant that she also talked to us, as we ate what was left of him. Oh, and she sang. Anna and Brian began humming a catchy tune that I slowly recognized. They'll throw in dirt and they'll throw in rocks, Nicole sang. And they won't give a damn if they break the box. The worms go in, the worms go out. The worms dance nightly upon your snout. Nicole wrinkled her nose again, this time with a grin. We listened, she told me, leaning over the couch. We listened and learned from the voice. She told such wonderful stories. She made the world sound perfect and good. Each memory of a day with the farmer seemed worth 1,000 of our lives. The widow made us envious, you understand? We began to hate the voice in our own tiny, mindless way. We hated her constant, mewling joy. It wasn't fair that she got to live above, to feel seasons, to feel anything. That hate brought us together, made us less deaf and blind and dumb. But there was only so much we could process as we were. So we decided to change, to grow, to take from you everything that we were lacking, to make the world fair. Do you understand? Or would you like to see more? Now it was Anna holding the kitchen knife, the tip of it just under one bright blue eye. I don't mind showing you, Daddy. Nothing hurts anymore. Stop, I moaned. Please, God, stop it, stop. Easy, dear, Nicole cooed, brushing the stumps of her missing fingers across my cheek. There's no need to be upset. We won't show you any more. We know you understand. I turned away from her touch. There was a smear of her blood from my nose down my jaw and something else. Something more solid. Something squirming. Fuck! I wiped my face clean against a couch cushion. This isn't real. Nicole sighed. It is real. Say it. Say it now or see everything. She lifted the hem of her shirt to just above her belly button. Her stomach was a mass of knots, twisting and untwisting just under the skin. Anna handed her the knife. It's real, I whimpered. It's real, I understand, it's real. I'll do whatever you want, it's real, I believe you. Don't show me anymore. The three of them were smiling. Beaming, even. Nicole put the knife on the coffee table and smoothed out her shirt. I knew you'd get it, she said. They weren't sure if you'd be the right one, but we knew. Right one for what? Well, here's the question I mentioned earlier. Have you ever wanted to be a tour guide? I couldn't stop staring at the red and white stain on the cushion. Parts of it were still moving. I turned the pillow over. Huh? I asked. There was a knock on the door that stopped Nicole from answering. Brian walked over and opened the door. A few of our neighbors walked inside, then a few more. I recognized Walter and June and their children, along with a dozen more I'd only glimpsed during my walks with Charlie or hadn't seen at all. Everyone was watching me. Waiting. I understood. Slowly, terribly, inevitably, I understood. Of course, I sobbed. I've always wanted to. Where do we start? What do you want to see? We put up posters for Charlie all over Stonebrook. He's been missing nearly a week, but I'm sure he'll turn up. I thought I saw him a few days back at the edge of the forest, but it couldn't have been him. That dog had the same dark gray coat as Charlie, but it ran off as soon as I called his name and threw a rock at the tree next to him. But I'm sure he'll turn up. The whole neighborhood is keeping an eye out. They really are lovely folks, and there are more moving in every day. I doubt there will be any more houses available within, 3 or 4 months at most. It was fine with us. It meant our property value would keep going up, 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 and away. We started a neighborhood watch. Movie nights, too. Mostly documentaries, but a great mix of everything. We set up a projector and screen right outside the little graveyard so families can set up lawn chairs around the stones and spend the whole night together. I even got elected as secretary of the HOA. It mostly involves planning. Planning community events, open houses, and trips. Gosh, so many trips. Museums, theme parks, beaches, cities. There's so much curiosity in Stonebrook. Just another of the million reasons why this place is so perfect. With the most incredible neighbors. Lovely folks, all of them. Lovely, lovely folks. Lovely. Lovely. Become a channel member today for early access, bonus videos, and special emojis only available to members. Check out the description below or click the join button for more info. If you'd like another way to help support the channel, please consider joining my Patreon page at patreon.com/JordanGroupeHorror. As a patron, you'll get access to bonus videos and content. You'll be credited at the end of every video going forward, and if you decide to stay for 3 months, I'll name a character after you which will be featured in a Hollow's End story. Links to join the Patreon are in the description. Thanks everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment to help the channel continue to grow, and see you again next time at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope you have a great night.